It's not a low art, you know. I want you to know that. What I do means something to millions of people. My folks didn't have the money or the education to go to the theater, so they went to the vaudeville houses, and then the Nickelodeons, and you know what? There's beauty there. What happens up on that screen means something. Maybe not to you in your ivory tower, but for real people on the ground, it means something.
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Barterk. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Ryan. How are you?
I feel tired. I've gone
Oh, do you want to go to sleep then?
through quite the journey, quite the odyssey, in fact. It feels biblical, what we've been on. We took an unexpected break because we were too sad about the breakup of Tenacious D.
A few days after we recorded.
A few days after we recorded,
and like
broke up.
And like a week before we uploaded the episode.
Yeah, through shenanigans of weirdness that we won't get into. And then we took that break, unexpected. You know, we were mourning. We were upset because Bartek had to get a refund on his Tenacious D tickets because they were touring here. So
Ryan, you got me into them thanks to that episode, and then it just all went down.
And then they got you out.
Yeah.
But we are here again with the microphones and a film under our belt that we've watched in preparation for the discussion on the podcast today. But most importantly, we are spitting young gentlemen. We're very well dressed today. We are wearing our tuxedos.
Mm-hmm.
We look like Brad Pitt in a period piece film. And I am just glad to be back here. And we both happen to be Polish. And were there any shenanigans happening in Poland since we've recorded last? Any happenings? Anything going on, Bartek? Anything that you want to update us about, or just any trivia that you have under your belt?
Look, ask me again when Tenacious D goes to Poland, and then I'll tell you.
There was one time they went to Poland. It was in the late 1930s, and it didn't go very well.
Yeah, in the little break we've had, I think the Olympics started. Has Poland been doing well?
No, probably not.
Probably not.
What are they the best at when it comes to athletic Olympic stuff? Are they really good swimmers?
They might. I almost said soccer, but that's not Olympics, is it?
Are they really good at ping pong?
Poland.
So we are Spittin' Polish Presents likingly because we're always spitting, and we both happen to be Polish, and we care so much about that. Hence, we make sure to reference it, and we are here with our show Pictures Powwow, the original PP. And on that, we talk about a film that has come recommended, and we were recommended a film by a friend of ours. Yes, you can recommend films to us as well as not just friends of ours or us ourselves. You, the listening people, if you have a suggestion to make, give it to us. Hit us up on those social medias or our email address, all of which is in the description. We add it to the list, and this was a film that was added to our list, and here we are talking about it. And what is that film, Bartek, and who gave it to us?
The film is the 2022 film Babylon, which was recommended by our friend who's been on the show a handful of times, Stefan.
Babylon, directed by Damien Chazelle, starring Margot Robbie, Brad Pitt, and a whole cavalcade of unexpected faces of A-grade actors to surprise character actors, little cameos, and big ones, and small ones. Jean Smart's here. She's back.
Yeah, this one is an ensemble question mark film, so there's a lot of people.
There's a lot to take in, and how best to describe Babylon for those people in just what it is about, because I feel, as I mentioned last episode at the end, the film has a ethos and a reputation around it that can be the thing that's alluring and or repelling. But what is Babylon about? How would you describe this to someone if you were trying to get them to watch it?
In definition terms, it is an epic in the sense that it is taking place over a pretty long period of time. It starts in like the mid-20s, slowly goes across over to like the early to mid-30s, and then jumps to like the early 50s at the end. And as you said last episode, almost said week, It is looking at the state of Hollywood back in those time periods. So at the first couple of years I mentioned, it was still the silent film era, and then it starts evolving into the talkies era, where films now have sound, and you start to see how this change affects the Hollywood landscape and how it affects a lot of the stars of one era going into the other, and seeing how that also affects not just their, career lives, but also their personal lives.
This is an epic in scale, in production, in caliber of actors, in length. It's very long. It's over 3 hours long. And yet it is also very outside of the bombacity, because this film is very bombastic by nature. It's very decadent. The music is always going. This is a film that I would describe as one that never shuts the fuck up. But when you actually get to the stories themselves, they're very simple stories. There's 3 or 4 main characters that you follow, and their journeys, their rise and fall within the Hollywood system, and how do they land or don't? How do they maintain their dignity or their careers or their integrity or whatever the case may be? How does this chew them up and spit them out again? That is the way to best describe it. You're going to have a person who is just a helper, a guy who just wants to do anything. Oh, he's going to wrangle animals, and before you know it, he's a studio executive. You get the handsome, rugged, A-grade, A-listing star, but he has a hard time transitioning to a different era, and how does it work out for him? And the young, upcoming, gorgeous superstar lady who is adored by everyone and gets reviled by everyone. It's one of those things in which each one of the tales told are very familiar, but it's in a presentation and a package that is quite a lot. And now we're getting into things further, so if people have not watched Babylon for yourself, recommend that you do watch it, because we're going to get into the details. And you and I both have the same history in terms of we have not seen this film before. This is our first time watching Babylon. So tell me a bit about your experiences going into the film. Did you know anything about this? Were you aware of it when it came out? And your experiences now having watched it?
Yeah, I didn't really know anything about it. I'm not sure if I'd heard of it, but obviously at the end of the last episode, you gave the recommendation for this episode, and you said like the few things you knew about it, and that's basically all I had going. And it's been a couple of weeks since then, so some of those details slipped. I did re-listen to the ending of that Tenacious D episode just to, catch up on what it was. Because I, was starting to think like, oh yeah, well, maybe this film's going to be like this genre. It's like, oh no, it's old Hollywood. Ryan said it's old Hollywood. So yeah, I was kind of expecting something in the sense of like, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which came out 3 years before this.
By the way, I completely didn't remember that Brad Pitt was in this movie, so that comparison is something to keep in mind.
It's a very apt comparison, not just to that, but also that I think he was in the last Listening People recommendation we did.
Yeah. And again, spoiler alert, things don't work out well for Brad in both films we have covered recently.
Yeah,
things don't work out well in the exact same way, but different too.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's the one where he got off the best.
He's fine in that one.
He's fine in that one.
Arguably a hero.
Oh, spoiler, Ryan.
Oh, spoiler. But go on.
Yes, I didn't really know much going in, but I will say that the first chunk of the film certainly set the tone. How about yourself, Ryan?
I have a relationship in a way with the director Damien Chazelle. I saw his film Whiplash when it first came out, before all of the buzz for it, before all of the big acclaim for it. It came out in Australia earlier than in some other countries.
Oh, okay.
And I really liked it. It was in a year in which we were getting great film after great film after great film.
That was 2014?
Yep.
Yeah.
Nightcrawler was the same year. Like, it was just
You sing the praises of 2014
2014 was a great year.
And there was a lot of good
2013, 2014 period was a really great time for movies.
Always been meaning to check out Whiplash.
And Whiplash, really great. And I loved it, and I thought it was wonderful. And I was like, I got to keep an eye out on this director. And then La La Land happened. And I didn't get on the bandwagon. I never checked out La La Land. And it has had its own life in which the debacles at the Oscars is infamous. people who love musicals either despise it or love it. And every subsequent thing he's done since Whiplash, I just have no interest in. I'm like, oh, the La La Land, the musical about two fucking privileged little white people who discover what jazz is or something, like that's the joke people make about that movie is, oh, Ryan Gosling discovers jazz and he's now a superstar. And obviously Emma Stone, the rise and fall of a, whatever, or struggles of a starlet. And then he did, I can't remember the exact timeline, but he did First Man, the Neil Armstrong biofilm, in which it's like, do you want to see Ryan Gosling do the face, the stoic face? And I'm like, not really. I'm not really interested. And then Babylon came about, and I saw so much promotional stuff for Babylon. Like the poster was everywhere, the trailer was everywhere. When I would go to the cinema, they had a huge cardboard cutout of Margot Robbie being carried by the crowd, and I was like, God, this looks like a lot. And just the negative reputation of this, in which people were turning against it. People were annoyed that, of course, the Oscars were lauding this film because it's another example of them sucking themselves off of like, oh, a film like that is at the golden age and has all these references and in-jokes and all this stuff of the system and of Hollywood, and that's what La La Land did. And I'm just like, not interested. I was never interested in it. The length is something that scared me off as well. But then we got recommended it, and I thought about it, and I'm like, well, maybe it's something worth checking out, because I haven't seen this director's work since his first one, and I know this is his most polarizing and most self-indulgent piece, I guess. Like every big film director of note does this type of thing, where they're like the one for me, one for them type mentality, and I'll play it safe, and then I'll have my fucking big, lavish, ambitious, over the top, this is for me type movie. And I'm always interested in those, whether they're good or bad.
Yeah.
And so
it says something about the director as well.
But I did go in with my head held low, because I just wasn't like...
The way you described it last time was people either love it or, quote, fucking despise it, I believe it was.
Yes, that's how I've come across it. People are either defenders for this or not. Like, there's this big online swirl about how this is just another example of how hollow movies are. Like how, if you do a fucking 5-minute montage of Hollywood films over the years, then you get a pat on the back because, oh, aren't you so clever?
Yeah, my understanding, looking it up after watching it, is that this is one of those films that has, like, a small, passionate fan base that really think that it's top tier.
And so I did walk in with my head held a little low, and I watched the movie. Mm-hmm. I did it.
You did this morning, I think. You're pretty fresh.
I watched it all in one go, did not have any breaks, did not get distracted, and I was taken aback by the simplicity of those stories. Because once you get past the extravagance of the technicals and the production and the depravity that they're showing you on the screen, each one of the characters that they follow with your Margot Robbie, your Brad Pitt, and so on, their stories are very boilerplate, very by the numbers. There was no real shocks to them. There were shocking things in them, but like how the story played out overall wasn't anything, grand or innovative. It was just, oh yeah, this character encounters Tobey Maguire, who's a freak, and I love that. But like, the story itself is very much like, if you know what they're doing very early on, you just have to sit and watch it play out. Mm-hmm. So that was something that took me aback a bit. But what was your journey with it, impression? You already said like that first chunk really set the tone.
Yeah, because it really starts off with a bunch of like shocking things. Like I described something that happens in the first 5 minutes as an elephant absolutely diarrheaing on a guy. Mm-hmm. And I've never been the biggest fan of gross out humor, so that right there is like, okay, this is kind of what I'm in for. And then shortly after that, you got, golden shower scene. About halfway through the movie, you have something that's like halfway to that infamous Family Guy vomiting scene.
Yes.
Where someone's just absolutely
blowing
out their chunks from in their body onto the floor.
And on someone.
And on someone, yeah, that's right, yes, on a very snooty person. So it's funny when a snooty person gets dirty.
That is comedy 101.
Yeah. There were, a lot of things in this film that's like, ooh, very shocking. But one thing that I guess was ever present in the film, and you kind of went into it a little bit when early on you said that this is a film that never shuts the fuck up,
Mm-hmm.
is, that its sense of humor is very beating you over the head with a lot of characteristics of characters. So, like, for example, the Brad Pitt character, you can tell what type of character he is from the get-go, and it feels like every single thing he says is like reinforcing that idea. It's like, look, my head's way over this. I don't care about this. Oh, this is what's going to happen now. We're going to go to my house.
He's very carefree.
I'm going to do eccentric things, and it's very predictable in that sense. And a lot of things he does in the film, it's like, yep, that's in line with the character. But then I would say that like the second half of the film, while I was really the first half of the film really put into my head, like, okay, I know what kind of film we're going for here. A lot of things throughout the rest of the 3-hour runtime were also in that vein, but there are a couple of moments here and there. It's like, that was actually really good. It's a film that, like, on the scale of, like, did I love it or did I hate it? I honestly can't say where I am. I think for most of it, it's like you can cut out so much of this, but occasionally there's something like really good here.
And the argument is that excess, that fat, that repetition feeds into what the film is about and feeds into the era that they're exploring, and about that Babylon is a very, very purposeful title, and just, that's a defense one can make. Now, I will say that, shockingly, I didn't feel the runtime, weirdly enough. I think it's because every scene's so fast, and the music is so ramping up, and it didn't burn me out, because then they would let the air out of the balloon in the right moment. Like, you'll get a scene where Brad Pitt and Jean Smart sit down, and and all the music drowns, like, goes away, and it's just a very simple scene of being told, your career is over, your time is over, and it's like a full 2-minute long scene of two characters talking, and you'll get those at the right moments. The movie will put down in the right moments when things need to breathe and to slow down. So the pacing of it being over 3 hours long didn't impact me. And, like, lengths of movies can be, there's a whole conversation to be had about how one feels about that. And for the most part, I don't care too much. I think I care a lot more if it's like certain genres or subject matters. I'm like, really, do we need a movie about Aquaman that's longer than 2001: A Space Odyssey? And this is a film where I saw, even before going in, I understood why it was so long. I'm like, yes, the films that even you show in this are as long as this, or nearly that length, and so I get it. So the pacing of the film, to praise it on my end, I thought it was really well done. I think the tone and the performances, and especially the music, helped to aid all of that. And I can't fault any of the actors in this. They're all giving 110%. Like,
I agree, yeah.
I kind of admire how much Margot Robbie makes this insufferable character watchable and likable. It was actually fascinating. I'm sitting here with Barterk, and on the desk is still my copy of Cabaret. And I was thinking about Liza Minnelli in Cabaret, about how she had a very similar type of kind of energy of like this non-stop talking, fast talking, shrill, annoying character who the actress brings a certain something that makes you want to follow them and watch them. And in the case of Cabaret, I think that character is more likable inherently, and tragic in a way that I relate to than the one in this. But Margot Robbie, she's a star. Like, you can't help but want to watch her do what she does. And same goes for Brad Pitt, where Brad Pitt's very funny and he does that stuff. But Brad Pitt, like with some of his other films, even around, especially in this part of his career, like Ad Astra, there's a certain melancholy he brings to a lot of roles that's very subdued, that you just can't help but lean your head over and be like, I see what's happening here. And the fact that the characters in the movie aren't seeing it makes it more sad.
Yeah, especially in that later half when he's in like the downfall of his career.
Yeah, so overall, how do you feel about this? So you're kind of like, love it, hate it type of thing. We've talked about that. Like, I'm not in a love it or hate it camp either. I think overall, I liked the movie. I think I was actually quite surprised. I said to my wife, you know what? I actually kind of liked it. I'm shocked. I kind of liked it.
I think I like it more than I dislike it. Yeah, just it, and it didn't drag too much for me, but it did feel like there was just too much put into the film. You can really see the imbalance in some things. Like earlier, I made the joke like this is an ensemble question mark film because there's like a couple of characters that are treated as like, oh, these are the central characters that we're following, and the ones that I can see that for the most are Margot Robbie, the guy that plays Manny, and Brad Pitt. But it also feels like the film thinks that the musician guy,
Palmer,
yeah, Sidney Palmer is one of them. But he's so... I know this is a 3-hour film and he has plenty of scenes as a result of that, but like I feel like we see him so infrequently.
I agree.
Early on, it was like, okay, this is like a little side story that's happening that we're gonna come back to, where he's like having a tiff with his bandmates. But then his career takes a big step up, and now it's just him on his own, and you get these scenes where it's like major moments in his career, but we're just not following him frequently enough to really say that this is one of our main characters.
Let's get into some of those negatives, I guess, because you're talking about that character, and that's one of my biggest criticisms of it. I love that performance. I think he does such a good job. I am not familiar with this actor. I haven't seen him in much. I looked up his IMDb. There's shows and movies I'm aware of, but I haven't watched, or maybe I have and just haven't really looked at what he's like, looked at his performance, but I really thought he was magnetic, and it made me upset that he didn't get more to do.
I 100% agree with you. That's exactly what I was thinking.
And then the problems come in with this film and the director's previous ones. The criticism can be made of it sure does care about these poor white people in the Hollywood industry. Oh, how tough it is for the white people. How tough it is for Emma Stone to break through in Hollywood. Boo-hoo. And this is a film that's like, well, we'll address that. We'll have 2 stories about people of color who, in this time period, did manage to find success, but they're the first ones to either be kicked out or leave. But the thing is, both those characters don't get any focus from the film itself. It's like the film is trying to have its cake and eat it too, where the film is trying to make a commentary about how the Hollywood system does not actually support, or in the golden age especially, support and lift up and maintain and help people of color. But then the film isn't either. Who are these 2 characters? Like, we get Palmer, and he's a stoic black man who doesn't want to debase himself, but then does because it's expected. But you say that and it sounds like an interesting story, but relatively speaking, in the 3-hour runtime, he's maybe in 10 minutes of the movie, if I'm being generous. Like, of actual, like, here he is in the movie, not just, oh, he's playing trumpet in the background of a scene. Like,
I'm cringing because I think you might even be right, yeah.
And then we got I'm forgetting the character's name, but like the Chinese woman who's the singer,
Lady Zhu. I think?
and she has more of a character to her than Palmer, who is in the context of this movie has a story. Like, Palmer has a story. He is one of the leading characters, but he has less of a character and characterization than this supporting character herself. And I just go, well, why don't you tell the same story but just through her? Just through her. Like, she's a person of color who gets rejected by the system in the end. They use her for exoticism and then chuck her out.
She interacts with the other 3 main characters more than he does. I think he has the scene with Manny and that's it. Does he talk to Nellie or
He's
Brad
in the same
Pitt?
scene as Nellie, witnessing her freak out, and he's like, great, awesome, and it kind of pushes him to leave the party. Yeah. So he does kind of circle around the other characters briefly, but not in a way... Yeah, like how...
Dynamics. He needs dynamics.
Just in terms of like his story and what you got out of it, and how the film managed to succeed and or fail. Talk about that. Like, talk about this Palmer character a bit more rather than just, let's say, he didn't get enough to do. Like, what did they do with him and how did they succeed and or fail with this character and what they were trying to say?
Well, it is interesting because this is an actual black character in a film set in the 20s and 30s. And I guess, thinking back on like history, like this is before the civil rights movement and all that, you would imagine that life was not very tough, not very easy for black people back then. So it is interesting to see, this character finding success and, being part of this world that, we're criticizing the film for, being about, the struggles of white people, but, they were the ones who, had the biggest careers back then. So it's kind of justified. So it's interesting seeing a character in this world. And if he had a bigger presence in this film, I think it would make a stronger statement about, what his race's, context in that time was.
And the statement of, well, because it's this time period, this industry, focusing on white people makes sense. Yes, of course. But the film itself went out of its way to bring this character into the limelight, give him something to do, and that brings the commentary with it. And the film is explicitly doing that, especially with making him darken his skin to debase himself, and he rejects, he quits Hollywood from that. It's just so unfortunate that in a way this film is still not interested in telling any story about the people of color in this world. And since it does do what I would say and you are saying is like an half-hearted attempt at it, or like a limp-wristed attempt at it, in a way it kind of makes it worse, because it just reinforces the notion in my brain of this film's more interested in the fucking vapid white people than the actual people who are struggling. And then it brings up all these other questions. Like, okay, the closest you get, and correct me if I'm wrong, because there's so much in this movie to take in.
Yeah, I'll try to correct you if
The
you're wrong.
closest we get to actual racism is in that scene where they want him to darken his skin. Like, closest we get to, like, here's direct forms of racism. There's scenes of people, like, who are interested in Palmer, like, at the fancy party.
Yeah.
I guess you could call that, like, a classist, racist kind of underpinning. But, like, directly, like, here's a thing that you would say, Babylon's scene that tackles racism. It's probably the one where they make him have to darken his skin.
That's probably the only one, yeah.
And it's weird then that that's the only scene in the 3-hour movie that even does that. And it's between a Mexican man and a black guy.
Yeah, and there's that whole justification of like, oh well, look, there's this objective reason why we have to do this thing. So it kind of, I almost said muddies. It kind of complicates that a little bit further of on his emotional level. Like I just remember the scene where he's darkened his skin. He's playing the what did he play again?
It's like the trumpet or trombone or something.
Yeah, the trumpet. And you can just see in his eyes, like, he's still focused and he's doing a great job on that instrument, but you can just see how sad he is while playing it.
And when he pauses to take breaths and stuff, the pauses are longer than they were before. And because you can tell he's feeling contempt for himself.
Yeah, just, you can tell that he's feeling humiliated.
Again, that scene's so magnificently done that it makes me upset that the film isn't actually interested in doing anything more about this.
In the end, that's like the final big scene of his, isn't it?
Well, you think it is. Because he leaves the lot and says, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, his character's done. We go to Tobey Maguire much later, and I went, oh, what happened to Palmer? I guess Palmer's done, like him going, I'm out, I'm never coming back. But then, right near the end of the movie, we cut to him in a club. And he's like, I'm going to play one of my old songs I haven't played in a while. And he's just back to his roots.
Yes, that was later.
And he plays the music throughout like a very long sequence, a very important sequence. And that's like kind of like the capper to show us like he went back to what actually mattered to him as an artist rather than someone seeking fame and fortune and to be remembered like everyone else.
Yeah.
He gets a happy ending.
Yeah.
Even though he had to, go through the horrors of it, he came out on the other side okay. But the thing is, the movie brings up one time explicitly in a major form the racism, but then it makes it weird when the Chinese lady who's doing all of this stuff is never directly getting any racism towards her, or the Mexican man who is now a high-level executive, and it's like, I feel like
I guess
I feel like there would be some conflict there. But here's the thing: in a movie, sometimes you don't need to bring those things up, and you just go, for the sake of the story, we're moving. We're not going to include that. But this movie did include stuff of it, and so when it it's like, well, you didn't bring it up in these other moments. It's weird.
With the Chinese lady, they went for a more homophobia thing. Where it was like, oh, we are letting you go because of your, your style and your lifestyle, or whatever.
The exoticism of her.
The exoticism of her.
Which, again, that's something. That is something about this stuff. But then also, like, Manny, none of him being, like, they mention he's Mexican, like, because of his name and stuff, and he can speak, obviously, multiple languages, but, like, he doesn't really face any major struggles because he is Mexican in a way that you would expect with him being such a prominent character whose story is that he climbs up the ladder of industry. He's not becoming a Hollywood star. He's becoming the mover and shaker of movies. And there's nothing. There's no, it's just weird. And so that's kind of like my big sticking out point of Babylon is I don't think this movie has much to say about anything. It's pretty hollow in itself, and it's that thing of it wants to talk about how like inert and vacuous and cruel movie making and humanity can be, but also show the beauties and wonders and all this stuff. And although there's some really powerful scenes and some really well written and well acted scenes, as a whole, overall, I just find the film a bit voiceless, honestly. It's like, yeah, you have all of this crazy shit, but I don't really feel like you're saying much about anything that isn't what you and I could say on the bus. Like, oh yeah, did you read about what happened to that Hollywood person? Yeah, this industry sucks, am I right?
Yeah, it feels like most of the film was going for, like, the negative side of everything, like the Hollywood machine will chew you up, spit you out. They'll forget about you even if you live on in the memories of people hundreds of years from now. And so it feels really weird when at the very end of the film you get that montage of, like, films throughout the ages, going all the way from, like, the I forget his name, the one from Hugo, the moon rocket, all the way up to, like, Avatar in 2008.
That was embarrassing. That was embarrassing. Avatar? You're gonna end with Avatar? There's not been any other big success
that whole
story
sequence,
since then. Like, they didn't show a Marvel movie either.
This might be too much of an in-joke, but that whole sequence,
I don't need them to show a Marvel movie, by the way.
It felt like something our friend Stark Reality would make.
It felt very pretentious, and
felt like I was watching
Raylene. You know what film did this really well? Ed Wood. Where Ed Wood, for the sake of what it was doing, went past the real life tragedies of the man and presented it in a very romanticized way, but in so doing, it's darkly comedic. Because at the end of Ed Wood, again, spoiler for that film in real life, he's like, I'm going to be remembered for this one. And it's the infamous movie that he's remembered for because it made him cemented as one of the worst filmmakers of all time. But you get the text scroll of, like, what happened to him, and it's, like, really sad.
Yeah,
but
it happened to everyone else.
Kind of funny because you get this upbeat ending of, like, he did it. But then the real life comes in, and it's kind of tragic and funny. This film, I don't know, man. It kind of went this way where I really loved what I thought was going to be the ending of Manny's in the cinema and he's watching all of these movies that have taken the experiences of his life and the people around him, and they've made them into a farce, into jokes, into caricatures, into stories, fables. And he breaks down crying at the beauty of it and the horror of it. And I was like, that's a great ending.
Yeah.
But then it kept going.
And the types of films that, the type of the film that he was watching, it reminded me of some of the, like, 40s, 50s, 60s films we've done on the podcast, where it's like, yeah, they do have that kind of upbeat style and their sense of humor is a little bit silly like that. And, that's the style of that film. But when you put that in the context of, like, what was happening in real life, it was, like, a much more serious in the film Babylon
Yeah,
2022.
and again, they did some really interesting homework because the films he's seeing are real films of that time, like Singing in the Rain, obviously, and like some of the others that they showed. I'm like, oh look, that's that person, that's actor, and so you have to think like they, as filmmakers and writers, thought about these movies and like how could we spin a story that kind of like link like the gymnastics and thought process of like how they kind of wove these things together is nice. And again, talk about the negatives and being pretty harsh here, and yet I still really like the movie, and I just a moment ago said I don't think it has much to say, and I still think that's true, but in a way it was the experience itself, the characters, the humor, the eccentricities, the fact that this exists, this is on the screen, this is something that was nominated for so many Oscars, and it's weird. It's a weird movie at the same time. Like, yes, it's trotting a lot of ground that's very familiar, very well known to us, but it's something that also does so many bizarre things. I keep circling around it, but of course my favorite thing was Tobey Maguire. Of course it was. How could it not be my favorite aspect of the movie? Welcome to the, what was it, the asshole of LA? Like that whole
Yeah.
entire set piece and sequence of events was just so weird to me. And I kept thinking, what other filmmakers of such prestige are going to throw these in? Not as many as I want. I was watching it thinking David Lynch would be proud. Paul Thomas Anderson would be proud. Like, watching these type of things.
It reminded me a little bit of like the beginning of The Elephant Man when you're going through the circus.
Yeah. But what are some things that you want to talk about with Babylon? What are some things you want to get into?
Well, you just talked about your favorite aspect of the film. My favorite aspect, my favorite scene was the scene where they were filming Nellie's first talkie, the one where she was, doing the college film, because even though, I know objectively, like, first there were silent films, then they introduced sound and they made sound films. I just never really considered like the struggles that people would have gone through,
the
like
discoveries.
the discoveries that they had to make, and that scene, I just thought like perfectly captured like what it might have been like. I've said before that the film has a sense of humor that like really beats you over the head. For most of that scene, I thought I was completely kind of fine with it because it really added to the stress of it.
It was a marvelous scene. It's probably the crowning jewel scene in terms of like getting at the period piece of it all, and just the idea that you do see a lot. The film even references other movies doing we went from silent to talkies, and yet this style of going about the transition you don't see often explored enough, or the way, again, it was given to us, presented to us.
Every little thing like that every character was doing in that added something to it. Like, one of the first things you see is Nellie, who's, just been natural star the whole way through and everything's going her way. Her just struggling to remember, like, a bunch of lines before going on set. It's like, oh, that's a new challenge.
She's never had to learn lines.
That's something I don't think any actor's done or would have had to do. And even before, we get the title card and you have that whole, day of shooting in that big area, like, I just wasn't connecting that, like, all these different films are being made next to each other and, like, there's so much noise happening. It's like, well, that's gonna get picked up on the microphone, guys. What are you doing? It's like, oh, it's silent films. It's not a problem. And then suddenly you have this scene where it's like, oh, now it would be a problem. Person sneezes and it pisses a guy off.
Shoes.
One person in like a room upstairs is like, oh, something's wrong. I'm going to start again. Everyone else gets upset. It's like, guys, this is my job. I can't change the microphone. If there's one problem, it's a problem. You're wearing rubber shoes. That ruins everything.
Yeah.
Stop opening the door, guys.
Oh, man. And the characters losing their cool and getting more and more upset, as also is physically hot in there because of the lights, and they're inside the studio now. They're no longer outside. And one thing that I was keenly aware of was we had the female director who is a real life wife of Damien Chazelle. So that's a fun little thing. And she disappears from the movie pretty much after that big scene. And you can tell that she reached her breaking point, that character, when you just have these shots of her sitting in her chair. And throughout the scene, you just see her grow more and more and more and more and more despondent and nihilistic and cold.
She was one of my favorite characters in the whole thing.
She was very good. And And then she's gone, but I didn't need an exit farewell. Like, they told the story really well. And that's something I want to praise. Like, a lot of this movie does visual storytelling and all of that. We talk about like the repetition and hammering in on the head of jokes and stuff, but so much of the powerful things to me, or communication of theme or character stuff, was done through just shot composition and editing and just how they compiled the things together, not the dialogue per se.
According to the trivia, that the person she was playing is the person that created the boom mic.
Oh.
So, when she had the whole thing like, can we move that microphone that's up there? It almost is like a
origin story.
A call forward to like what she's going to create.
Oh, that's a neat little insider detail there. Yeah, that scene was great. Yeah, they killed a guy during it. That was funny.
Yeah, when you first meet her and she's like, I need someone with bigger breasts. Like, at that point, I was still like, oh, okay, yeah, they're really, beating you over the head with what type of character this. But after that point, it's like everything she did, it was like, oh, really great.
Yeah, she was
the way she like was very professional, artistic in her directions, how she was trying to take the actress's side and everything. It's like... And she had to make concessions to like, okay, we can't change the mic. Nelly, you're going to have to tone down the performance so you can get your cues and stuff. It was like, so tragic in a way. It's like, oh, it's hampering the artistic process.
I will say that out of the set of characters, Manny was probably the one I gravitated towards. I like that type of story. I like seeing him have to micromanage and deal with problems and get himself into more chaos, doing those things with of course, the height of it all being him having to deal with crime lords and gangsters and criminals to help Nellie out of a problem that she has found herself in. And Tobey Maguire shows up as a kingpin who's a freak. I don't even know what's going on with him.
He's eccentric mobster boss.
I was so happy to see him. And he's got these yellow teeth and this gaunt look and these dark circled eyes, and yet he's Tobey Maguire. He still has like that baby face, and
you can hear his voice. Yeah, it's Spider-Man.
He's so eloquent in this, though. Like, he's trying to be all gentlemanly and, yes, I've got movie ideas. And then he'll just be like, I've got an idea. It's a 50-year-old midget. And it's like, okay. and his right-hand man, his goon, I know that actor from a bunch of things, too. He was Randy from My Name is Earl. And I was like, oh, it's that guy. I like that guy.
Was that the brother?
Yeah, that's the brother.
I remember that.
Yeah,
character,
yeah.
I think. Okay.
He's a guy who's been in a ton of things. But there was just a lot of really well acted and written scenes and sequences of events, whether they were the big bombastic ones or not. I did particularly like the party in which Margot Robbie was getting so annoyed. Nellie was getting so annoyed at how things are turning on her. She overheard those people talking shit about her when she was in the toilet. Like, overheard those people mocking her and saying her career was going to go down the drains. And so she reacts so aggressively by being like, okay, I'm going to see where my dad is and I'm going to make him fight a snake.
Right. Yep.
And just that whole series of events with like, let's drive out and see my dad fight a snake. And hey, it's Eric Roberts, by the way. Everyone's favorite Roberts family member. Her dad was played by Eric Roberts. So dad of Emma, but brother of Julia. But he was great. I like seeing Eric Roberts. I thought he was going to die. I thought he was going to get bitten in the face by a snake, but he was fine. He worked out okay. But just her, just Nellie having the snake on her neck, and she's like running around screaming at everyone, getting into a panic, and Brad Pitt being like, again, his character is interesting because he has these subtle nuances that no one recognizes within him, including himself. That shot on his face, as you can see the joy leave his eyes, and almost recognizing that the tides have changed and he's no longer part of this anymore, and like this is all going away now, to then being called to action, like his wife or his fiance is like, do something, and you see him have to kind of turn back on that mode, and he does the big hurrah, like, go forth, and then he immediately gets hit by a car. I really love those little touches of just, let's linger on an actor's face, and they're telling a story of their own that we're not really being as explicit about with the other things we're doing. I really like that. Like, that scene is so over the top and silly, and Margot Robbie is screaming her head off as she's holding up a fucking rubber snake. That's all fun and games, but I like how in amongst all of that we have a little moment of recognition from another character who's also been a joke character for the most part up until that point.
Mm.
Were you thrilled when Brad Pitt was introduced speaking Italian? Shitty Italian again?
I didn't immediately see that it was Brad Pitt, but when I did, I was like, oh, excellent. I've seen a film where he spoke Italian before.
Oh, that was great. What are some other things that you observed about the film or you want to discuss, highlight, go over?
Let's have a look. I guess in the early chunk of the film when it was still, I guess it was a prologue.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the prologue ends after that big film shoot, but it's a very long time. We had that day of shooting where it kept saying, like, the time of the day. And I thought, because the party scene before that was already, pretty long, I thought that was going to be the rest of the film. Like, oh, what's going to happen on this really long day of shooting where there's so many films being shot and there's all these, like, little antics happening. So when that was over with, relatively quickly, I was like, oh, okay, what is the film going to be then? So in a way, yeah, it did kind of keep me guessing. And I'm thinking now again, like when it did introduce the talkies thing, yeah, it did have a couple of interesting twists throughout the first 2/3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I didn't feel the runtime either, even though it did feel long in the end.
Because so much has gone on, yet so much hasn't.
Yeah.
We can go through some of those characters and their journeys a bit. So, Nellie, what did you feel about Nellie herself?
Nellie herself, again, when she was introduced, it felt like I knew exactly who this character was, and because a lot of the dialogue that she has with Manny in their first couple of scenes is so fast-paced, I didn't necessarily know if I was enjoying their scenes or not. Like, I remember the one where they were like, what do you like about movies? And they're talking about how, like, oh, you can just sit down for an hour or two and just enjoy another world, but they're speaking, like, so quickly.
Because they're on coke.
And because they're on coke that, yeah, I just didn't feel like it really added, the weight that the conversation needed to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But as the film went on and she started, showing, deeper signs of herself, like how, especially when she started struggling with her career, and you had those moments between her public appearances, that's when, the depth of the character was really coming out, and you could see, like, who this person was. And I enjoyed her as it went along.
There was the conversation with Manny in the car that helps tie up her character where
Perfect example, yeah.
she discusses how she's going to leave this world behind and in a way left the movie in that she's going to be defiant. She's not going to be owned by anyone or told how to do anything. She's not going to be tied down. She's going to dance away. And that's how it does end for her. She, at the end, has the opportunity to settle down, to live the life of expectations, to do the right thing, to do the things that is what people want of her, but that's not who she is. And so she recognizes that that's the path she can go, and she says no, and she just gets out of the car at the end and dances down the street into the darkness, never to be seen again. We find out her fate, but we don't see her again. And I really like that type of thing. She's fast talking. She's a lot. I tend not to find these type of characters actually that annoying for the most part, even though they are designed to be.
Yeah, me neither, yeah.
I have an affection for the kind of shrill, loudmouth characters. I do, so...
And it complements the film, because in the silent era, that's absolutely not a problem.
What she has going on ties nicely into some of the other things, which is, yes, she lacks talent in the what we would now consider the more conventional acting style, but in the silent era, she was a star. She was very good at it. She was natural. She didn't have to try. And then she was forced to change, and she didn't want to. She tried, and it didn't work for her. It made her throw up. Yeah, figuratively and kind of literally. And each story that we're following, in a way, is about what the speech, the columnist, like the gossip lady says, which is to Brad Pitt. It's not because of anything in particular. It's not because of your voice or your talent or because you're a bad actor or this or this or this. It's just how it happens. Things just end. And I think each one of them have that, where Nellie, people rejected her because of who she was. Because she's from Jersey, because she's a loudmouth, because she has this voice, because she's too fat, and because all of these things. And even when she tried to fix them, she recognized that they still didn't accept her.
Mm.
They still didn't accept her, so she wiped their ass with that. Like, she just wiped her ass on that and just said, I'm out of here. And same with Brad Pitt, where Brad Pitt, he gets that direct speech, where there's that scene where you see his movie that they're all laughing at. And I don't know if you had a similar thing, where I watched it and I thought it was directed and performed in a way where there was no tell of why this would be funny to anyone. It's not like he is giving a bad line delivery. Like, Brad Pitt plays that scene like a professional actor. It's not like, oh, you can see like he's playing as Brad Pitt, the actor giving a slightly awkward. No, it is a genuinely solid performance, and yet people are laughing at it anyway. And you're like, why are they laughing? And so it really gets you into his character's headspace.
I was watching that. I'm like, I guess he's slightly slurring the lines, but like, there's no. It's not a caricature of that kind of performance or anything. It is just like a something factor.
And how much is it that you're looking for something because you know something is being mocked and something's wrong, apparently, according to the masses? Because he has the build-up of, he doesn't know that there's anything wrong, and yet people are giving him the condolences, like, oh, I'm so sorry.
And I guess kind of complementing that and the vacant stare scene that you mentioned he had before. Later on, when he's doing the, you know, quote, piece of shit film where he's on the beach next to someone who's like delivering his lines, I found that scene kind of interesting in the similar way you were talking about with that desert scene where, you know, everyone on the set is behaving professionally and it's just like a normal shoot.
But it's also kind of shitty. Like, there's little details thrown in. Like, the director's I think he asks like the lead guy, like, could you just like act good? Like, he has some line where it's like basically asks, could you do a good take?
Yeah.
Which is funny.
Yeah, and it was just interesting, like, seeing him exist quietly in like that world where you're like, you know, he's like looking around at everyone. And it doesn't even necessarily seem like the film might even like, you know, end up being a piece of shit, but just like, you know, something's not connecting there. And like you said, that scene with the columnist where she gives the whole speech, that was another scene I really, really liked because, you know, that type of character and, you know, the way that scene begins, it almost feels like she's going to have some sort of like, you know, leaning villainous kind of tinge to her.
And again, he even makes the argument that you could see the film do, which is, well, I actually create something while you tear stuff down, so your opinion doesn't matter. And she's like, yeah. Guess what? We're in the same pile of shit, okay?
Yeah. And then
I'm a cockroach. Great, cool. Call me that. But in the end, we'll both fucking die. And none of this will matter, except for it will matter because blah. You know?
I was surprised because in a way, like, she was kind of saying something a little bit beautiful and like, you know, it might seem bad now and, you know, someone 50 years from now, you know, won't really know too much about you, but like in 100 years, you will still exist in these films that people can watch and, you know, you'll always be a star in that way.
And he has this conflict with one of his wives, the last one, about movies being low art. And that was an underpinning too of the film of, we saw the transition of, yes, this is an industry, but it's an industry that's, you know, as we saw when they were in the desert or, you know, in the hillscape, shooting all of these silent films next to each other. It's a mess. It's haphazard. It's a just absolute pigsty of a thing. This won't work. And the mentality of people changing about films being legitimate, being real business, being real art, that happens. Like, look how many he grows throughout the film, in which, you know, like, who knows? And by the time we get to the end, it's like it's a proper industry in which you have to do all of these things for it to work. You can't just improvise and do it on the fly like you could anymore. And Brad Pitt was arguing about that throughout the whole entire thing. Like, he was a man that could not, like, he was willing to adapt and tried to adapt, but he was rejected nonetheless. He was a person that was not unwilling to change, and he recognized the beauty of the change, but in the end, he couldn't as well, and so he kills himself. And it's a very serene sequence of events that when he dies. But
the film doesn't do it with him, but in the IMDb trivia that I was reading, the person that they said is the main person that Jack character was based on, I forget their name, I can look it up later. They're an actor who, started in the silent era and then did the talkies. And the disconnect people had with him in the talkies is that, as good as he is, good looking and good as he is in silent films, his voice was a lot softer than what it looks like would come out of that person's mouth. And so that's where, he kind of became the joke and ridiculed.
Yeah, but in this film, they make sure to point out that's not even the case. It's not like you have a funny voice, so they did that. And
with him, it was just like you don't have the it factor or anything. I guess that was more of the Nelly thing. But
yeah, that was the Nelly thing.
There's something and it's just not working.
It was the fact that it's over. Yeah. It's been over for a while, you just don't realize it. While with Nelly, you don't have that it factor for what we need anymore. And I said, like, Manny was the one I was invested in the most. He just has he moves between all these different worlds. He's the guy that I think we see a very much at first, like through the point of view of. Obviously, we start with him, but
he's the behind the scenes guy.
He's the behind the scenes. He's the guy we begin the movie with and end.
He doesn't have a problem with like the performer aspect. It's the business aspect.
What did you feel about his character and how he operated in the story and that performance? I'm not familiar with this guy either, actually.
Yeah, me neither. When I was listing out the characters before, I didn't remember his actor's name, so I just said the character's name. I enjoyed him. Yeah, it's interesting because he does have that classical, capitalist, like you start from the bottom, you make your way to the top, you meet more important people, that's how you get there. It's like he's just a worker at that venue that the debauchery party is happening at.
Yep.
He befriends big Hollywood actor Jack that Brad Pitt plays. He gets onto the film set. He does a really good job there, and he just gets higher and higher and higher.
Befriends Nellie before she becomes big, and then she becomes big, and then they help each other.
And the big turn of his career, and I guess this is something we forgot to mention when we were talking about Sydney before, is him seeing Sydney's talent and taking him to the top, and that's when he becomes the big studio executive. I think was his role.
Yep. It's a fun story with him, and there's just so much here. Like, the technicals of the movie is very impressive. Like, lots of one-take shots, lots of really complicated choreography you have to think about, lots of little musical sequences, people sing and dance. There's great costumes, memorable costumes, like Margot Robbie's red dress thing that she wears is memorable. You remember that dress, like where we introduce her in, and you remember her crazy hairstyles. Like, these are memorable things, like, that you may not think is important, but in a way it is. Like, oh, when I think of Margot Robbie characters, I'll think of one from Babylon who surfed on a crowd of people wearing that red dress. That's something where the film knows it too, because by the end you have the reference to Marilyn Monroe in one of the shop windows in her iconic white dress, and it is important. It is something that happens in iconography of things.
The film has a couple of call forward stuff, like in the beginning part where they've got the big film set, Brad Pitt in his tent is like improvising catchy lines and like variations of famous lines that will, be in films coming later.
One of them is Gone with the Wind.
Yeah. Frankly, Scarlett, you're a cunt. And hasta la vista, motherfucker.
Yeah.
And we see a poster for Gone with the Wind later, and we see a clip from Terminator 2 at the end.
We do. So it all came to pass.
He needed to quote Avatar, though.
Yeah.
Misquote Avatar.
Well, he may have quoted Avatar and we didn't know it, because does anyone remember a singular quote from Avatar?
Exactly.
Yep. Thank you. Fuck you, Avatar. I can't wait for Bartek's pick to be Avatar soon. But I don't know if there's much else I have to say about Babylon in general, other than just like I really like this scene, I really like this touch, or I didn't like this. But as a like a deeper analysis of it, I, despite it feeling a little shallow in its commentary, and I think that there's more that they could have gotten into, not just with the racial things, but there is some more stuff there that they could sink their teeth into. I like it anyway. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed its sense of humor. I got from your statements that you were not as into the humor, or at least it wore thin on you.
Mostly early on, yeah. And it did kind of keep up, like, okay, yeah, I get it. But again, there were enough scenes that I really liked that I can, excuse it, I suppose.
But I did enjoy its humor and its sensibilities.
I did have one good laugh out loud moment, though. I just remembered it. It was when Brad Pitt was in the toilet.
Oh,
yes. And the guy's telling him, like, oh, yeah, sound in films is the next big thing. And Brad Pitt's like, do people really want to hear sound in films? And then just like a really loud shit is happening in a cubicle.
I thought you were going to say when his manager, George, is trying to kill himself, but then they try and help him, but his head is stuck in a toilet. And then we just cut to later on. We just see George is freed, but he's still got the toilet lid on around his body, and throughout the whole thing, that was pretty good. I got a big laugh out of that when they were all freaking out about the snake and how Margot Robbie had it on her. She runs up at him, and he can't really run away that easily because he's got this toilet lid stuck around his torso, and so he falls over. It's very silly, and I appreciate that. But no, I enjoyed this. Again, they did go in places I didn't expect, or at least the way they went about them were unexpected. Everything with Tobey Maguire, I wish was more. I wish there was more stuff like that in this. I kept thinking that this movie oscillates between being a really interesting Coen Brothers romp or a really interesting David Lynch romp. Like, it kept going between those two modes. I'm like, do I want this to be more Mulholland Drive-y in its approach, or do I want this to be more Barton Fink in what it's doing? That's a Coen Brothers movie. I kept just having those things happen every now and then. It's like, oh yeah, maybe because also some of the actors from those movies pop up. Like Flea was in this, by the way. Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers. And I was so happy to see him. I'm like, hello, Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah, I think when I was reading up about the film, there was some reviewer that said that it's very similar in tone to The Wolf of Wall Street.
Wolf of Wall Street, yes, of course. And also, like, I did think about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And as my final statement to really fucking ruffle feathers, I enjoyed this more than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I have said I want to rewatch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. See, that's a movie that tested my patience more than this for some reason, and yet I do want to rewatch that. Maybe one day we'll cover it on the pod, or I just rewatch it. I don't know, but that's one where everyone loves that movie, or at least a lot of people do, and it didn't gel with me for some reason. Babylon did. It had more freaky shit in there for me. It just had more dumb, weird shit in there.
I want to check out Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well. I might be leaning more towards it, but yeah, I need to check it out again.
But anything final? Would you recommend this? Anything lingering? Anything you want to state?
Yeah, I haven't had too much of a conversation with Stefan about the film. I just told him, like, oh yeah, we're doing this next. And his response was like, oh, that's a good film. Not perfect, but good enough.
That is a great way to describe it.
At first, when he said not perfect, but good enough, I'm like, oh, that seems like a little bit, like... It seemed like, oh yeah, you're just trying to find something nice to say, but I can kind of see what he means now, yeah. This is a film that I don't think you can really argue is perfect, because there are so many flaws in it, but there's a lot going on here that is pretty good.
Are you a fan, whether the film is good or bad, of these type of movies in which a director just has no restraints? Because that's how I would describe this as well, in which the director is like, okay, I've earned my goodwill. I'm going to make my 3+ hour long fucking unbridled piece of work. Like, are you a fan of that, whether they are actually good or not?
I'm pretty sure that's exactly my case with Nothing But Trouble.
There you go. Well,
No,
Where's his cut?
It's fascinating, yeah. I like these kind of films where, yeah, it says something about the director or like what they enjoy.
Yeah, I do too. I'd rather a big mess like this than like a studio compromise, like we played it safe. Oh, aren't you so happy that Venom turned out that way? It's like, no. No, I'm not. But
This film wasn't too dark for me,
good.
like in terms of lighting.
Yeah, no, I
I could
understood
see
what you meant.
things.
You could see Brad Pitt kill himself or the remnants of his death.
I could see him survive falling out of his window.
Oh, that too. Yeah. So, your turn now to recommend a film, and yours is going to be a non-Hollywood pick because
Mhm.
last time you picked a Hollywood movie.
Yes, a
So
52 film.
now you are going to give us one from another land. And what have you got for us?
I pulled out my phone just so I can get the year, and I realized I googled Poland in the Olympics, and I
And
still
how
have
did
the
they
results
go?
here. Currently, as of this recording, Poland is equal 44th with Greece. They have 1 silver, 3 bronze, and 4. I don't know what that last symbol means.
I don't know, gold.
Oh, 4 in total.
4 in total.
So so Poland has a silver medal and 3 bronze so far.
Good.
Good job, Poland.
Good job, Poland. So, what is your movie of choice?
Yep. So last time I picked a 1952 black and white film. This time we are going to a 1950 black and white film. Going back to the land of the rising sun, Japan.
Oh.
We are going to do the only Akira Kurosawa film I have seen, and that is Rashomon.
Good. Rashomon.
Yeah.
I know how to find that easy enough.
Mhm.
So everyone, make sure to check out Rashomon. If you are not familiar with it, you will be once you watch it, because its storytelling style, everything has done
Yep.
since then. So
It's
it'll be
a-
actually interesting to give this a watch.
Yeah, it's a phrase everyone knows, like the Rashomon style of storytelling.
Or well, you say that, but don't spoil it, Bartek, because, it could be like a Murder on the Orient Express thing in which you tell someone and then they're like, what? I don't know that.
Yeah, I mean it is a mystery, but yeah.
I have never seen Rashomon.
I mentioned it.
so
I
I'm
mentioned it
interested.
to you when I watched, and like, oh yeah, I've never seen it, but obviously I know the style.
I've seen some Kurosawa's, so this won't be new to me, but it will be new to me, but like he as a filmmaker won't be new to me. So I'm excited to check this out. So everyone, make sure to give that a watch in the meantime, okay? Make sure to do that. Make sure you remember that. Don't misconstrue things there. Make sure that you watch that film, not another film.
And then next episode you can listen to my explanation of the film and then Ryan's explanation of the film.
And just for good measure, my wife's explanation of the film, and we need a fourth story.
Yeah, a person who was passing by to sell jewelry.
There you go. Oh yes, of course. But thank you all so much for tuning in. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter under Spit and Polish Presents. Our email address, if you want to contact us more directly, is
spitandpolished@gmail.com.
And please do not blame us for what happened to Tenacious D. We weren't there. There's no evidence that we were there, but you could also say there's no evidence we weren't there.
Yeah, the tour.
But it wasn't me.
The tour wasn't in the state we're in. It's in the state that Ryan's from.
And if you're going to make a connection with that, that's on you, okay? Yeah. I didn't do anything.
There's no other connection. Just because Ryan recommended the film and the incident happened in his state.
And I specifically highly praised Kyle Gass. Don't... And also made statements about how Jack Black really loves doing kids' movies. And, well, look, it's not connected. We didn't do it. Okay? You can't lay charges on us for that.
Hey, a couple of months ago, Ryan, weren't you looking really closely at a picture of Donald Trump's ear?
I knew you were going to do something. I was really worried. You're like, Ryan, a couple of months ago, I thought you were studying snipers.
I didn't know whether I should make the joke or not because, people have made jokes about it before and, things
well,
have
you know what
happened.
happens. Bartek's management dropped him after this episode.
No, they dropped you because it's like, oh, Ryan, you were doing that?
Oh, my God. And then Bartek...
That wasn't me making a joke. That was me dobbing on you.
Oh, you are a teacher, so you do know you're a professional dobber.
Is dobbing an Australian term?
Tough, they can look it up.
It means I was telling on him.
And I was wagging.
That means he was playing hooky.